Those who create know that inspiration can come from any place at any moment. For me, it's this moment. Today, we embark on a journey into the world of diorama crafting. Join me as we delve into the process of commemorating the Helldivers. Welcome. I'm Adam, your unexceptional host for this build, and today we're going to be creating a Helldivers diorama. I decided to start with army men as I needed something for the base model of my characters, and they were just easier to start with. I had to first trim anything that wasn't necessary and also cut off any parts that might not fit what I was going for. I also had to adjust the way the arms were positioned so that it would fit the desired positioning for holding rifles or for holding a comms relay, for example. One of the Helldivers is holding a radio to call in a stratagem in hopes that maybe they'll survive the incoming onslaught of bugs, which we'll see later. Building these soldiers took a little bit of effort because originally I was trying to use plastic glue. Unfortunately, it didn't hold as they were not made of plastic that worked with this kind of glue. So I had to use super glue and I had to pin every arm that I had to change. To pin the arms, I just used aluminum wire. It's easy to bend and it's easy to build off of, especially for sculpting and for customizing. I knew I wanted to make the scene from the cover art of Helldivers where the four men are being surrounded, and it looks like there's no hope because honestly, when you play the game, that's a little bit like how it feels. I wanted to capture that in one small moment on a diorama, and hopefully I did that, but this is Unexceptional Craftsman, so what you see is what you get, guys. And there we are, all done. Beautiful. Now, in order to customize these men into looking like Helldivers, I decided to sculpt with something called green stuff. And if you don't know what that is, that's like an epoxy putty. You have to mix the two parts together, and when you do, it creates green stuff. This becomes moldable, shapeable, I suppose, and you can use it to form quite a bit of things, but it is not the most flexible thing in the world, so sculpting into it isn't necessarily easy. It's also my second time using it, so don't expect anything miraculous from this. You can see that I have to put in parts of putty to fill in the chest. I'm going to be sculpting in the armor as well as sculpting on limbs that I've had to cut here and change. And it took a few layers, actually. So I started with one layer as the clothing layer, and then eventually I would go back over again to make the armor on top. And this just allowed me to build out bulk without constantly having squishy layers to work inside of. That first layer gave me something to build off of with the armor. I also wanted to make absolutely sure that one of my Helldivers was valiantly holding a flag in the background, and to do so I needed a flag pole. And I had aluminum wire, but you can see it's all bent. So in order to straighten it, I just simply rolled it. It actually straightened way better than I thought it would, and it works perfectly for this man. This Helldiver. Sculpting with green stuff is fun, but difficult. Especially on this scale, sculpting in general is difficult. And especially when it's your first time doing it. So please be kind, folks. But I enjoyed it, and I think it turned out pretty well, especially when you're not right in front of it. Sculpting the helmet was pretty cool as well, because this is where it really truly started to become the Helldiver I knew it could be. The helmet and the armor are kind of what sell this Helldiver, but there's also one other part that really sells what a Helldiver looks like, and that is coming up soon. But I did have to cut some small pieces for parts of the armor that may not have been attached to the torso, like the arm guards, the shoulder guards, as well as the leg guards. Green stuff is very sticky, so when you sculpt with it, be absolutely sure to put water on your tools. It does help quite a bit. There we go. That guy looks like he's about to deliver some freedom. Going over this armor part again to smooth out and give it any last bit of correction that I can. Holding the green stuff and manipulating it over and over kind of leaves impressions of your fingerprints and other things, and so it can deform or leave marks that you don't really want. So it's important to make sure you go back over it again with a smoothing tool of some kind, just to smooth out those surfaces as much as possible. And an X-Acto blade works really well at detailing. This guy's armor was pretty neat. I really enjoyed the way it looked in the game, and so I thought I needed to put this on the diorama. He has a pretty large cylinder on his chest, probably some sort of oxygen tank, and I wanted to make him the one holding the stratagem's communication device, and so that's what he's doing here, calling in a nice stratagem to help out his squad. And here we are. The part that makes a Helldiver spectacular. And this is the part that makes the Helldiver a Helldiver. The cape. Man, look at that flow. If you lay out green stuff flat on a piece of plastic and put some water underneath it before you smush it out, it actually separates really easily, and then you can roll it flat, as I have here. That helps a lot for creating flat panels or things like the capes, or these shoulder pads. They can be then taken off and applied as necessary. I finished up anything that needed to be finished, such as the small details, and we were good to go on those guys. Now, to give them some weapons. I have a decent collection of Warhammer models that I don't need. They didn't go to any specific unit or soldier, and therefore are just sitting there. And I figured if I could take those and customize them slightly, they'd be perfect for my Helldivers. Now, the last part was the flag. You know, I thought, what could I possibly use that would be sturdy enough to hold itself in a nice waving position? And I was drinking this delicious Dr. Pepper one day, And I realized aluminum cans are thin metal. Why not just use that to create a flag? Just by cutting out a small rectangle and then bending it into shape, it held its form perfectly and is now being used by me in this diorama. Ta-da! So we get to the bugs. I'll be honest, I'm not a sculptor, and I've never really sculpted anything like this before, so it was quite a challenge. I started with an aluminum rod and then wrapped aluminum foil around that to give it some bulk, and then I chose some firm Sculpey to use as my sculpting medium. Sculpey is pretty cool. It's an oven-baked clay, so what you do is you create your sculpture with it, and then you bake it in the oven and it hardens. The only problem I've had, or faced I suppose, was these legs. In this particular bug, the legs were already attached and overall didn't serve too much trouble, but I did find that any thin parts easily could break off, and if they support weight, as a lot of them did, specifically on the legs, they would break off. So I had to be very careful about that. But past that one particular problem, sculpting with Sculpey is pretty fun. After getting a decent base layer on the bugs, I then sculpted in, or should say carved in, some lines to use as separators for this carapace. Now, I'm not going to lie, these bugs do not look exactly like the bugs in the game. And also, I'm referencing the first Helldivers, as I started this diorama slightly before Helldivers 2 was released. So the motivation to create the diorama comes in part from both Helldivers 1 and 2, but some of my models are certainly based off of Helldivers 1, so just keep that in mind. But again, they don't look exactly the same either way. I took inspiration and I went with what I could, and to be honest, that's enough for me. Just keep in mind that when you're creating something, it doesn't have to perfectly represent what it is that you were going for. I think embodying the essence of that is enough for me anyways. And so to create this diorama and to create these bugs, I was simply inspired and took that inspiration and ran with it. Moving on, the first thing I had to do after sculpting the initial sculpt was to bake it. And this way I could build on some thicker armor plates and then sculpt a little more detail into those. If I had left it as the initial layer of Sculpey without baking, it would have easily smushed every time I tried to sculpt something. And even still, that happened. But I moved along with it pretty well, and baking along the way definitely helps to sort of save your progress, as it were. I made sure to put in some cracks and small scratches and even just grooves into this armor carapace to make it look more bug-like, more natural. And I think it worked out pretty well. I'm very happy overall with the way the bugs turned out, even if they don't exactly match the game, as they do a pretty good job of giving you the idea, and there's enough detail that I was able to paint it and make it look pretty interesting. This one tool, by the way, was fantastic for most things I was trying to do. On one side it had this poker, and on the other side it had that smoothing kind of hook that you saw, and it did probably 95% of my sculpting. So if you're interested in sculpting tools, this one was pretty cool. I don't know what it's called. I don't even know where you get it. I just know I like it. So if you see it somewhere, hey, there you go. If you notice, the left leg is not finished, the right leg was. And that's because, again, I baked this first and then went back over with some more Sculpey to create those front claws. This guy gave me trouble. The initial sculpt was great, but massive. It was probably twice the size I needed it to be, and it broke. It broke in the oven. I couldn't get it back together. I tried, but once I realized that the height scale just wasn't right, it didn't matter. I was done with this piece, and sometimes you have to take your losses and move on. So I did. And actually, I think it worked out, because the second time I did this model, it came out better. I had the practice from the first one, and I was able to put the lessons that I learned into the second model and make it even better than the first. So in the long run, it did pay off to redo this and not to struggle and try to salvage something that wasn't worth salvaging anyways. So, you know, let that also be a lesson. Why not? 2 lessons in one day. Look at that. This time I baked the legs and the body separately, and then attached them afterwards by drilling small holes into the body that I could slide the pieces of aluminum wire into. I also added some super glue and also some more Sculpey that I would then one more time bake to harden every joint that I'm attaching here. I will say, looking back on this, it may have been easier to leave these separate and just glue them in later after painting, but that's okay. That looks much better. Right, these guys need somewhere to be, some place, and so I started with this wooden base. It's a good sturdy foundation because on top I'm using packaging foam. I simply took this out of some packaging we got. I don't even remember what was in it, but that doesn't matter. What does matter is I took this hot wire cutter, cut out a nice circle by just spinning this. Look, no fancy tools, all by hand. I didn't have any sort of cool table or device or anything, just the cutter itself. And I was able to get a decent circle. Once I had the circle cut out, I went ahead and sculpted some slopes into this because while I want the Helldivers to be surrounded, I also want to be able to see them. So I sort of dipped down the front just so that if there was anything in front of them, it would be slightly lower than the elevation that they were on. I cut out some rocks using the same hot wire cutter and the same packaging foam and made sure to cut off the edges so that they matched. Next, I took this cork and ripped it apart. You can get this cork at Michael's, at least that's where I got it. It's 1/4 inch thick and it's just cork panels, but I broke them apart and created an interesting surface for the ground. I then went ahead and spread some glue across everything to make absolutely sure it wasn't going anywhere, and I could also fill in the small crevices with smaller pieces of cork. I'm not going to lie, it didn't stick the best. In some places I had to add a little hot glue or super glue. However, it did well enough that nothing's fallen off and everything's still intact even now. On top of that, I added some sand just for texture, and really mostly in the crevices because, again, the cork did not cover everything perfectly, and so some of the foam was still showing through. But the sand does add some really nice texture. The next thing I had to create was the extraction beacon. If you played Helldivers, you'll know that the most important thing after you're done completing your mission is extracting. And to do so, you need to find the extraction location, put in the code to call the extraction, and wait 2 minutes to be extracted. And so in order to do so, I need that beacon. I also wanted to include a landing site for one of the pods, just to make it look as if a stratagem had been called in, or perhaps a revive. Either way, just to create some sort of recognition that there was something called in earlier. I simply used some foam and the lid of a glue bottle that was empty, to create the top of this beacon. I also used the end of a mechanical pencil that had broken. There was no use for it anymore, and so now it serves a new purpose. For the base and for the relay comm fins, whatever they're called, I used thin crafting foam and a piece of cardstock. I don't know, thick card paper. Yeah, the stuff cereal boxes are made out of. There you go. And I cut those out to give some support. Lastly, I did create some green stuff, pieces for the monsters or bugs that I hadn't created yet, such as the fins on the stalker and some mandibles for all of them. Right, on to spraying some paint. I did spray a few layers of paint on using this really cool battery operated compressor. I don't have a nice compressor for air spraying. However, this does the job pretty well for me for anything that I've needed it for. I've used it from anything from painting terrain, as you can see, to painting Warhammer models, and it's pretty much done the job. I don't need much more than that, and so I don't think I'll be getting an expensive air compressor, but you know, they definitely serve their purpose. For anything simple, or for a simple coating like this, those battery operated ones work just fine. I like to give the Helldivers a what we call zenithal coat, and that just simply means that we're spraying a lighter color from the top to sort of recreate the effect of sunlight falling onto our characters. It just makes the surfaces facing upwards brighter and the surfaces facing downwards darker to, you know, sort of recreate shadow. After that, I also sprayed the base a little bit to make sure to give that some texture and finish up any other colors I wanted in the sub-layers. Once the Helldivers were dry, I went back over and darkened all of the cloth with a wash of dark black. I wanted the clothing to be darker than the armor so that they could sort of separate and stand out from each other. Finally, I went over with some yellow and brought out details as well as any trim or paint schemes that you could see on the Helldivers. In the original game, most of the divers were yellow, gray, and black. On this guy's oxygen tank, I needed to add a little bit of orange as well, so I went in with a small brush and did that. And finally, to finish them up, I just went with a lighter gray around all of the black and gray parts and gave them a slight edge highlight, something that you would learn from watching a lot of Warhammer painting tutorials. And that just helps to bring out any details that you can see, as well as give the guns or armor a little more contrast. That makes it easier to see small things from a distance clearly. The yellow also got a touch of highlight as well. And with that, these guys are looking pretty good. Perfect. Next, I dry brushed over the ground texture. This helps to bring out any of the texture we put in, such as the sand or the cork, and it also shows detail in the foam. This also gives us a little more contrast so that we can see those separations of detail. And to push that even further, I put some dark wash paint into the cracks and crevices as well. Coming up next on the ground, I needed to add a little bit of grassy texture, and so I started with a greenish teal color that was actually mixed with glue. As I painted on those parts, sort of in crevices and close to the edges of rocks and corners, I then also sprinkled on this turf, and that gave our terrain a little more realistic feel, as if something's actually growing on it. This is a fine turf. It's not really anything that would stand up tall. It's actually pretty minuscule, but it does add a nice texture, and it gives a little bit of a matte finish to areas that might have been a little more glossy before. We're starting to get to the effects of a terrain now. Time to paint some bugs. Again, I went over with my air gun and just sprayed a darkish brown color for their carapace. As in the first game, they are slightly brownish orange with a little bit of green as well. So once the brown was dry, I went back with the lighter green and sort of hit the tops of all the bugs. Again, a sort of zenithal spray, but also adding a different color into the mix. I then went in with the brush and added some detailed coloring, such as the orange that shows up on their armor, and then while the orange was out, I made sure to spray the comms display as well. The orange sort of represents weak points, and so I wanted to somewhat show that with those arms that come out of the ground from the impaler in the first game. I also made sure to finish up any details. Onto the flag. In order to make the flag work, I put Mod Podge onto the original piece of aluminum that I had taken from the Dr. Pepper, and then I just printed out the picture of the flag and then Mod Podged over top of it to harden it and keep it secure. It is definitely glossy, so I would recommend maybe putting a matte finish over top of that. However, it does the job and seals it really nicely. To do the flip side of the flag, I just printed the picture in reverse and then pasted it on the back. Well, this is coming together rather nicely, and as an unexceptional craftsman myself, I just want to say that in the grand tapestry of creation, remember that every stroke, every idea, and every attempt contributes to the masterpiece of your journey. Don't be disheartened if you feel talentless. True art is born from passion and persistence. Embrace the process, relish the joy of crafting, and let each creation be a testament to your unique voice in the world. The beauty of creation lies not just in perfection, but in the willingness to try, learn, and evolve. So, my fellow creators, my fellow Helldivers, let inspiration be your guide, and may your creative endeavors be a testament to the endless possibilities that unfold when you dare to bring your imagination to life.